You've probably heard the name Anunnaki, right? And it immediately brings to mind these incredible images, powerful, ancient gods, deep mysteries, and maybe, just maybe, visitors from another world. It's a name that sits right at the crossroads of ancient mythology and modern theory. So let's dive in and try to unpack one of history's most fascinating and, yeah, controversial subjects.
And really, this is the question it all boils down to, isn't it? Were the Anunnaki, the divine beings that the ancient Sumerians worshipped, the main characters in their mythology, or were they something else entirely? Something physical, actual extraterrestrial beings who came here and directly shaped human history?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, you kind of have to look at two completely different stories. The first one is a really popular modern theory that rereads these ancient texts as a record of alien contact. But the second story? That comes from academics, scholars who translate those exact same texts to figure out what the ancient Mesopotamians themselves actually believed.
So the version of this story that most people know, the whole ancient astronaut idea, that really hit the mainstream thanks to an author named Zecharia Sitchin. He put forward this radical idea that the Sumerian myths weren't myths at all, but were actually a literal history of how our species was created at the hands of extraterrestrials.
So, in this telling, who were the Anunnaki? Well, according to Sitchin, they were this technologically advanced humanoid species from a planet in our own solar system called Nibiru. And we're not talking about some spiritual realm here. No, this was a real, physical place.
Okay, and this next part is absolutely crucial to the theory. This planet, Nibiru, is supposedly on this huge, long, elliptical orbit. It only swings through the inner part of our solar system once every 3,600 years. And that long orbit basically sets the timeline for when they could visit us here on Earth.
And the timeline here, it's just staggering. Sitchin's interpretation says they first showed up on Earth almost 500,000 years ago. That is long before any human civilization we know of. Which, of course, brings up the big question. Why? Why would they come all the way here?
So the theory lays out this really specific chain of events. First, the Anunnaki show up to mine gold, something they desperately needed back home on Nibiru. But, the work was just too hard for them. So what's their big solution? They decide to create a workforce. They supposedly took their own DNA and mixed it with the DNA of the most advanced primate on Earth at the time, early hominids, to literally engineer a new species, Homo sapiens, us. In this story, that's what we were, a slave race, created for one reason, to dig gold for our alien masters.
I mean, it's a powerful, incredible story, right? But it makes you ask a really important question. Is that what the original Sumerian and Akkadian tablets actually say? To find out, we have to step away from the modern theory and go straight to the source. So let's switch gears and see what the academics have to say.
And to do that, we need to turn to the real experts, the Sumerologists and Assyriologists. These are the specialists who've spent their entire lives learning to read cuneiform, which is one of the oldest forms of writing on the planet. Their translations give us the most direct look we can possibly get at what the ancient Mesopotamians were really writing about their gods.
So let's start with the name itself, which is really interesting. The original Sumerian word was Anuna, and it translates to something like gods of royal seed or princely offspring. It was all about their high status in the divine pecking order. And this is a huge point. It wasn't a name for one specific unified group. A lot of the time, it just meant the most important gods of a particular city, like the gods of Eridu or Lagash. And what this shows us is that the whole idea of the Anunnaki was never set in stone. I mean, it changed a lot over the centuries. Early on, the Anunnaki are your main local gods. But then later, this new group pops up, the Agigu. Sometimes they're the top 10 highest gods. Then way later in Assyria, they draw a clear line. The Agigu are the gods up in heaven, and the Anunnaki are the gods of the earth, and, really importantly, the underworld. And just like their roles changed, so did their numbers. There was no single consistent count. Some early texts talk about the 50 Anunnaki of a city called Eridu. But then you look at the famous story of Inanna's descent to the underworld, and suddenly there are 7 of them acting as judges of the dead. But then wait, the Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish, talks about 300 in heaven and another 600 on earth. This kind of inconsistency is a huge clue that we're dealing with evolving myths and religious beliefs, not a precise headcount of an alien crew.
So, what did the tablets say they actually did? Well, their jobs were all about divine government, really. They were like a heavenly council. They decided the fates of people and kings. They were judges, especially in the afterlife. They got together for big feasts to celebrate and to praise what the bigger gods like Enlil or Marduk had done. They were beings you worshipped, not the foreman of a mining operation.
Okay, so let's put it all together. We have two wildly different pictures of who the Anunnaki were, and when you put them side by side, the difference is, well, it's stark.
First off, who were they? On one hand, you have the Sitchin theory, a single alien race from one planet. But then you look at the texts, and what do you see? You see this fluid idea of different groups of gods. Their roles, and even who they were, change depending on when and where you were.
And what about our purpose? Sitchin's theory is super specific. We were made to mine gold. Period. The Mesopotamian stories, like the Atrahasis epic, they also say we were created to solve a labor problem, but it was to take the workload off the lesser gods who were tired of doing all the cosmic chores. It was about general service to the gods, not one specific mining job.
And last up, where did they live? Sitchin points to a real planet, Nibiru, way out in space. But in the myths, the Anunnaki live right here, in the world as the Sumerians saw it. They're in the sky, they're on the earth, living in the temples of their own cities, and they're down in the underworld.
So you can see we're left with two completely different stories. But here's where it gets really interesting. The question isn't just, okay, which one is right? It's, why are we so drawn to these origin stories in the first place? What does this whole thing say about us?
Well, it really gets at this deep philosophical idea called teleology. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's the need to believe that things happen for a reason, that there's a goal or a purpose to everything. It's that deep human need to ask why. Why are we here?
Right, it's all about the why. And that's exactly what both of these stories are trying to do. They're both powerful answers to that giant question, why are we here? One answer is to serve the gods who created the universe. The other is because aliens needed cheap labor to mine gold. But see, both give us a reason, a purpose for our existence.
So in the end, it kind of leaves us with this final thought. It doesn't seem to matter if we're looking at ancient clay tablets or modern theories about ancient astronauts. This deep, intense need to know where we came from is just part of being human. And maybe, just maybe, the stories we tell about our beginnings tell us less about where we've actually been and a whole lot more about who we are right now, our hopes, our fears, and our never-ending search for meaning in this gigantic cosmos.